Forget everything you learned about manna. Erase the image of fluffy white bread raining down from a benevolent sky to feed a starving people. That story, the one told in Sunday schools and children's Bibles, is a comforting veil drawn over a truth so profound, so paradigm-shifting, it was intentionally obscured for millennia. The truth is this: manna from heaven was not simply food. It was a technology, a psychoactive substance, a carefully administered catalyst for the evolution of human consciousness, delivered by an intelligence that understood the very mechanics of the human soul. The 40 years in the desert was not a punishment for disbelief. It was a quarantine, a controlled experiment to sever an entire people from their slave mentality and forge them into something new, something capable of receiving a higher law, a divine blueprint for reality. What you are about to hear is not heresy. It is a decoding of the scriptures, a return to the source code of our most sacred stories to uncover the forbidden science hidden in plain sight. What was manna really? It was the key to unlocking a higher state of being, and its story reveals that the miracles of the Bible may not have been magic at all, but a lost form of physics, chemistry, and spiritual engineering that we are only now beginning to comprehend. Imagine the scene. You are one of millions, a refugee fleeing centuries of bondage in Egypt. Your world, your entire identity has been shattered. The known universe has been upended by plagues and a parted sea. Now you are in the Sinai wilderness, a vast, empty, terrifying expanse of rock and sand. The food you brought with you is gone. Desperation gives way to panic, panic to rebellion. You cry out against your leaders, Moses and Aaron, romanticizing the memory of your slavery, remembering only the fleshpots of Egypt and not the lash that came with them. This is the context into which manna appears. The conventional story tells us God heard their cries and provided. A simple, direct intervention, but the Bible's own account is strangely, unnervingly specific. It's filled with details that don't sound like a simple miracle. They sound like the operating instructions for a complex, and perhaps temperamental piece of technology. Let's look at the raw data, the eyewitness account preserved in the book of Exodus, chapter 16. It says that in the morning after the dew lifted, there on the ground was a small round thing, as small as the hoar frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they didn't recognize it. They said to one another, Manna, which in Hebrew means, "What is it?" This is the very origin of the name manna. It's a question, not a statement. This wasn't a substance they recognized. It was alien. Moses then gives them a set of bizarrely precise rules. They are to gather exactly 1 omer, about 2 quarts, per person, no more, no less. Any manna left over until the next morning would, as the text explicitly states, breed worms and stink. It would decay with unnatural speed. Imagine a food that spoils completely, transforming into a putrid, writhing mass in less than 24 hours. This isn't normal organic decay. This suggests a highly unstable substance, something with a volatile composition and a short half-life. But then the instructions get even stranger. On the 6th day, they are to gather a double portion, 2 omers per person, because on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there would be none. The supply would inexplicably cease for 1 day a week, every week for 40 years. And the double portion gathered on the 6th day, miraculously, it would not spoil. It would remain fresh and edible through the Sabbath, a substance that defies its own fundamental properties on a predictable, repeating 7-day cycle. This isn't the behavior of a natural phenomenon, like frost or dew. This is the behavior of a system, a programmed, automated process, a machine that runs on a schedule with a production cycle and a programmed day of rest. The narrative frames this as a test of faith. But what if it wasn't just a test of faith? What if it was a literal description of the operational limits and maintenance schedule of the device that was producing the manna? And what did this strange substance look and taste like? The Bible gives us 2 distinct descriptions. Exodus says it was white, like coriander seed, and tasted like wafers made with honey. Sweet, simple, palatable. But later, in the book of Numbers, After the Israelites have been consuming it for decades, the description changes. Numbers 11-7 says the manna was like coriander seed, and its color or appearance was like that of bdellium. What is bdellium? It's not a food. It is a fragrant resin extracted from a tree, similar to myrrh. It was used in ancient times for incense, perfumes, and as a component in medicines. It has a translucent, waxy, pearl-like appearance. So, we have a substance that looks like a seed, has the lustrous appearance of a semi-precious resin, and tastes like honeyed wafers. This is a far cry from simple bread. This is a complex, almost alchemical substance. The Zohar, the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, takes this even further. It describes manna as a form of crystallized spiritual light, a pre-processed nourishment that did not produce any waste in the human body. The mystics who wrote the Zohar understood that manna was not operating on the physical plane alone. They taught that its taste was not fixed. It miraculously transformed to suit the desire of the person eating it. To the righteous, it could taste like the richest feast. To the wicked, it would taste like bitter herbs. Imagine a food that interacts with your consciousness, your spiritual state, and reflects it back to you. This is not food for the body. This is food for the soul, a psycho-interactive substance. So we have a substance of unknown origin with a name that means, what is it? That is produced on a strict schedule, has a volatilely short shelf life, looks like a seed but also like a resin, and tastes different based on the spiritual purity of the consumer. This is the mystery we are told to accept as bread from heaven. But ancient wisdom and modern science compel us to ask a more daring question. If it was the product of a technology, where was the machine? The answer, I propose, was hiding in plain sight. In fact, it was the most sacred and feared object in the Israelite camp. The Ark of the Covenant. Let's re-examine the Ark. We are taught it was a sacred chest, a container for the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. But the biblical description of its construction reads less like a recipe for a wooden box and more like a schematic for an electrical device. It was made of acacia wood, a dense, durable, and highly non-conductive wood. This wooden box was then coated, inside and out, with pure gold. Gold is one of the world's best electrical conductors. What you have, in essence, is two conductive plates, the inner and outer gold layers, separated by a non-conductive dielectric, the acacia wood. This is the fundamental design of an electrical capacitor, a device that stores electrical charge. On top of the ark sat the mercy seat, a solid gold lid, from which two golden cherubim, facing each other, spread their wings. These cherubim, many engineers and alternative researchers have noted, could have functioned as electrodes, creating a potential spark gap between their outstretched wings. The Bible itself is filled with warnings about the ark's power. Unauthorized people who touched it were struck dead instantly, as if by a massive electrical discharge. Uzzah, in the book of Samuel, reaches out to steady the ark and is killed on the spot. Priests had to follow incredibly strict protocols when in its presence, wearing special linen garments and bells on their robes, perhaps as a primitive form of electrical grounding or a warning system. The ark was kept in the Holy of Holies, the most isolated part of the tabernacle, shielded from the general populace. Does this sound like a simple wooden box, or does it sound like a power source, a piece of functioning, dangerous high-energy technology? Now, let's connect the machine to its product. Several researchers, like George Sassoon and Rodney Dale, in their groundbreaking book, The Manna Machine, proposed exactly this. They argued that the Ark of the Covenant was a device, likely of extraterrestrial or lost ancient design, that was capable of cultivating and processing a nutrient source. Specifically, they hypothesized it was a bioreactor for cultivating algae, like chlorella. Chlorella algae, when cultivated, can form a nutrient-rich, greenish, white slurry. It multiplies rapidly and can provide all the essential vitamins and proteins for human survival. A machine cultivating this substance could easily be programmed to run on a 6-day cycle and shut down for a 7th, a Sabbath for maintenance or to cool down. The rapid decay. the breeding of worms and stinking, is perfectly consistent with how quickly harvested. Wet algae would decompose in a hot desert environment without preservation. The double portion on the sixth day could have been a more concentrated, or perhaps partially dehydrated, form of the algae that was more stable. This theory provides a stunningly rational explanation for the Bible's most bizarre details. The dew that appeared on the ground before the manna could have been condensation or an effluent discharge from the machine's cooling system. The daily gathering was necessary because the product was unstable. The specific amount, 1 omer, was the calculated nutritional requirement per person. The white, seed-like appearance fits with dried algae granules, and the taste of honey. Concentrated algae can have a surprisingly sweet taste, and flavor could have been added through a secondary process. The machine, this ark, would have required a power source. Perhaps it drew energy from the atmosphere from telluric earth currents, or from a small self-contained power unit within it. The biblical texts are silent on this, but they repeatedly associate the ark and the tabernacle with a mysterious pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. Was this pillar simply a metaphor for God's presence, or was it a literal description of the energy field or exhaust plume of a powerful generator? A generator that powered the manna machine, but a simple food source, even a technologically produced one, doesn't explain the whole story. It doesn't account for the mystical descriptions in the Zohar, the taste changing with the consumer's thoughts, or the profound spiritual transformation the Israelites were meant to undergo. This leads us to an even more forbidden layer of this mystery. What if the substance the ark produced wasn't just nutritious algae? What if it was psychoactive? What if manna was an entheogen, a substance that generates the divine within? A tool for altering consciousness on a mass scale. Think about the 40 years. A generation born in slavery, steeped in the polytheistic, materialistic and fear-based culture of Egypt. God, or the intelligence behind this plan, needs to communicate a revolutionary new concept of monotheism, ethics and cosmic law. How do you prepare the minds of millions for such a radical paradigm shift? You can't just lecture them. You have to change their very perception of reality. You have to open their minds. Many ancient cultures understood this. The Vedic priests of India used the mysterious soma. The ancient Greeks in the Eleusinian mysteries used the kykeon. These were sacred psychoactive sacraments used to induce mystical experiences and direct communion with the divine. It is the height of arrogance to assume the ancient Hebrews, guided by Moses, who was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, did not possess a similar tradition. Perhaps the Bible is the only account where this tradition was not for a secret priestly elite, but for an entire nation. If manna contained a mild consciousness, expanding compound, it would explain so much. It would explain the 40-year quarantine in the desert. It was a period to detox the people from their previous culture and simultaneously to attune their brains to a new frequency. A daily microdose of a sacred substance could, over time, foster a sense of unity, dissolve the egoic boundaries that lead to conflict, and make the collective consciousness more receptive to visionary experiences and divine commandments. The visions of God on Sinai, the intricate laws of the Torah, the complex architecture of the tabernacle. Were these revelations made possible by a state of heightened consciousness, induced and sustained by manna? It would also explain the people's later complaints. In Numbers 21 they cry out, "Our soul loatheth this light bread." The term light bread is strange. Perhaps it wasn't just about a lack of flavor. Perhaps they grew weary of the psychological and spiritual effects. The constant state of heightened awareness, the dissolution of the ego, can be exhausting. They craved the mundane, the heavy, the grounding sensations of meat and garlic, the flesh pots of Egypt. They wanted to come down from the 40-year high. They were rejecting the very tool of their enlightenment. What could this psychoactive component be? The theory of algae chlorella is a good starting point for the nutritional base, but some species of algae and fungi, which could be cultivated in a bioreactor, are known to produce psychedelic compounds. For instance, the theory of psilocybin, the compound found in magic mushrooms, has been explored. Could the Ark have been cultivating a specific strain of psilocybe fungus? The spores are microscopic. The process could be controlled. The description of manna as a small, round thing is not inconsistent with the pinhead stage of mushroom growth, and the rapid decay is certainly characteristic. Another possibility, favored by some biblical scholars like Benny Shannon, a professor of cognitive psychology, is that the active ingredient was DMT, a powerful visionary compound found in many plants, including certain species of acacia, the very wood used to build the Ark itself. Could the Ark's internal process have extracted and infused compounds from its own wooden structure into the manna? This would be an elegant and self-contained system. The manna would literally be a product of the Ark's own essence. This interpretation transforms the entire narrative of the Exodus from a story of divine handouts into a sophisticated program of spiritual engineering. The Israelites weren't just being fed, they were being rewired. Their brains were being prepared to receive the Torah, a complex data, stream of legal, ethical, and mystical information. The 40 years were necessary to allow the old generation, the one too steeped in the Egyptian slave mindset, to die off, while a new generation was raised from birth on this consciousness, altering food. This new generation would have a different neurological wiring, a different baseline for reality. They would be the first generation of psychedelic monotheists, primed for direct experience of the divine, not just belief in it. This reading also casts the figure of Moses in a new light. He is not just a prophet, he is a technician, an operator. The man who goes up the mountain into the thick darkness where God was, who speaks with a pillar of fire, is the one who understands the interface between the divine and the technological. He is the keeper of the operating manual. When the people create the golden calf, their rebellion is not just idolatry in a religious sense, it is a regression. They are trying to recreate the familiar, tangible, animal-headed gods of Egypt. They are rejecting the abstract, formless consciousness-based divinity that Moses is trying to introduce, a divinity whose communion is facilitated by the manna. Moses' fury, his smashing of the first set of tablets, is the fury of a teacher whose students have utterly failed their final exam, rejecting enlightenment for the comfort of the familiar. And what of the story of the quail? The Bible states that when the people complained and demanded meat, God sent a massive flock of quail. They feasted on them, but a great plague broke out and many died. A simple reading suggests this was a punishment for their lack of faith. But what if it was a biological interaction? What if introducing a heavy, complex protein like quail meat into a digestive system that had for decades been accustomed only to the pure, pre-processed, non-waste, producing manna, caused a catastrophic systemic shock? Their bodies were no longer adapted to process such food. The plague may not have been a supernatural punishment, but a predictable and fatal biological consequence of abandoning their prescribed diet. It was a stark, physiological demonstration of how much they had been changed by their 40-year regimen. So, where did this technology come from? The Bible is clear. It came from God. But our definition of God has been constrained by centuries of religious tradition. What if God in this context refers to an intelligence so far advanced that its technology is indistinguishable from magic to a pre-scientific people? This is the core of ancient astronaut theory, the idea that humanity has been visited and perhaps guided by extraterrestrial intelligences throughout its history. In this view, the Ark of the Covenant is a piece of alien technology, gifted or perhaps salvaged, and Yahweh is the commander or lead scientist of this advanced race. The 40-year journey is a post-contact acculturation program. This is a shocking idea for many, but it provides a cohesive framework for phenomena that otherwise defy explanation: the Ark's power, the manna machine's precision, the pillar of fire and cloud. Whether you choose to call this intelligence God, angels, or ancient aliens, the evidence within the text points to a conscious, methodical, and technologically sophisticated plan. There is another, more terrestrial but equally fascinating possibility, rooted in the idea of a lost, ancient human civilization. What if the technologies of the Bible, the Ark, the manna, were not from the stars, but were relics of a highly advanced human society that predated our own, a civilization destroyed by a global cataclysm, like the one remembered in the flood myths of virtually every culture on Earth. In this scenario, Moses, who was raised as a prince of Egypt, would have had access to the deepest, most secret archives of the ancient world. Egypt was known as a repository of knowledge from a much older time. Perhaps Moses rediscovered the schematics for this technology, or was initiated into a secret priestly order that had preserved this magic from a bygone age. He would then be reactivating a piece of lost human science to liberate his people. This makes him not just a prophet, but an archaeologist of the sacred, a restorer of forgotten power. This all leads to the final, crucial question: what happened to the manna? Why did it stop? The Bible gives a simple answer. In the book of Joshua, chapter 5, it says that after the Israelites crossed the Jordan River and entered the promised land of Canaan, they ate the produce of the land for the first time. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more. The program was complete. The training was over. The purpose of the manna was to transform them and sustain them in a place where no other food existed. The wilderness, which was both a physical and a spiritual state. Once they entered the promised land, a new phase of their development began. They no longer needed the externally provided catalyst. The 40-year rewiring was complete. The new generation was now capable of sustaining their connection to the divine through the practice of the law, through prayer, and through the rituals of the tabernacle. The training wheels were off. The machine was decommissioned. The Ark of the Covenant, its primary function as a bioreactor now complete, was placed in the Temple of Solomon, where it remained a powerful relic and a source of terror and awe. But its manna-producing days were over. And one final, tantalizing clue was left for posterity. Moses, on God's command, took one omer of the manna and placed it in a golden pot to be kept inside the Ark of the Covenant, as a testimony for future generations. Why? Why keep a sample of what was supposedly just emergency food? You keep it as proof, as a specimen, a physical artifact of the technology that made their nation possible. It was a message to the future, a message that says, this really happened. This substance was real, and it was the engine of our creation. That pot of manna, sitting inside the ark, became one of history's greatest lost artifacts, when the ark itself vanished from history after the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem. With its disappearance, the direct physical evidence was lost, and the story of manna could be safely softened, spiritualized, and turned into a simple fable about bread. So, let us circle back to the central paradigm, shattering truth. Manna was not bread, it was a product. A precisely formulated, technologically manufactured substance, likely an algae or fungal-based nutrient infused with a psychoactive compound. It was produced by a machine, a bioreactor we know as the Ark of the Covenant, which was itself a piece of advanced and perhaps non-human technology. The purpose of this manna was twofold: to provide physical sustenance in a barren wasteland, and more importantly, to function as an entheogen, a tool for the mass alteration of consciousness. The 40 years in the desert was a deliberate, controlled program to evolve a slave race into a nation of mystics, to prepare their very neurology to receive and comprehend a revolutionary divine law. The Exodus, in this light, becomes the most ambitious spiritual and psychological engineering project in human history. We have been trained to read the Bible with the eyes of faith alone, to accept its miracles without question. But what if the text is asking us to do more? What if it is asking us to read it with the eyes of a scientist, a historian, an engineer? What if the strangest, most unbelievable parts of the story are not the parts to be glossed over, but are in fact the technical specifications, the operating instructions, the coded schematics of a lost science? The story of manna is an invitation to ask these forbidden questions. It challenges us to see the sacred texts not as static dogma, but as dynamic, coded accounts of real events, whose true meaning we are only now developing the language to understand. The bread from heaven was a technology for the soul, and it forces us to wonder, what other miracles, what other divine interventions described in the ancient texts were also pieces of this same forgotten, sacred science, waiting patiently in the code for us to finally see them for what they truly were.